Hello everyone! Over a year ago I talked about the NES and SNES Classic Editions, and while I do love Nintendo, I'm also a big Sega fan. So when Sega announced the Sega Genesis Mini all the way back in 2018, I could not wait to get my hands on it. And after it released in September 2019, I got my version, but it's at my house right now, and if you're looking around, this ain't my house, but luckily I recorded footage from when I was at my house for this video. And since I took a look at my NES and SNES Classic Edition, might as well take a look at this one after Mario 3 took me a year.
When turning on the console, we're greeted with a nice Genesis tune. All the same options are still available as the previous two consoles I talked about, but now you can show the sides of the case like they're on a shelf. Nice touch. Also, I like if you select Japanese in the language settings, you'll change some of the box art and the ROMs of the games to their Japanese versions. Also, something cool of note that none of these consoles have done before is that the European versions show the European box art. Never was this a thing on the NES or SNES Classic, so nice touch, Sega. Now the actual game selection. Alex Kidd and the Enchanted Castle is our first game up, and it's basically the true sequel to Alex Kidd and Miracle World for the Master System. It isn't as good as the Master System original, but Enchanted Castle is still a good game, just not as long or greatly designed. What do? Well, you can jump and punch things and get coins. You can bet these coins at shops through the power of rock, paper, scissors, though your goal throughout each level is to finish the stage. The next game is something I haven't really played much of. It's called Elysia Dragoon, and it's awesome! This game is really fun, blasting lightning at your enemies with the creature friend dragging alongside you. Check it out, it's really fun. Here's a Genesis launch title, and the game bundled in with the Genesis systems before 1991. It's basically a beat-em-up where you fight different types of enemies and collect these orbs to evolve into different creatures in each stage. It also has a boss at the end of each level, but it can be pretty hard. Beyond Oasis is a pretty cool game. Basically, it's kind of like Zelda, as in it's a top-down perspective, and I liked what I played of this game. It reminds me of a beat-em-up. Next is really a cool inclusion, a Disney game, specifically Castle of Illusion starring Mickey Mouse. It's basically a really good platformer starring Disney's flagship mascot. You can jump and bounce on enemies and throw apples, and that's about it. This right here is Castlevania Bloodlines, one of my personal favorite Castlevania games ever made. It's basically a classic Castlevania-style game with stiff controls, two playable characters, lots of gore for an E-rated game, and pretty long levels. Columns. It's a puzzle game where you match 3 colors. Moving on. Comic Zone is one of the coolest and hardest beat-em-ups I've ever played. You play as a comic writer trapped in his own comic, and it's really cool how you move on to different sections of the stage. And it has really good controls. It's just really hard. Next up is probably the hardest Contra game ever made, and when it's called the hardest game in a series full of hard games, yeah, that's pretty hard. You can actually choose your character in this game. So I'm obviously going to choose the werewolf character, and oh my god, the explosions. There's so many of them, Jesus Christ. And yeah, this game is really fun, but it is very hard. I got a game over not too long in the game. Here's one of the first 2 bonus games in here, Darius. Darius is a space shooter where certain enemies can have upgrades for your spaceship. Unless you die, then you lose them. What I like about this port is that this version of Darius was made specifically for the Genesis Mini, which is really cool. Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine is a reskin of the original Puyo Puyo. If you don't know what Puyo Puyo is, it's basically a better Dr. Mario. Dynamite Headdy is one of those really good games made by Treasure for the Genesis. Your weapon is your head, it's great. Also, this game looks like an acid trip. That's pretty much all I have to say, since I didn't record much of this game. Earthworm Jim is a difficult but great platformer. The animations in this game are gorgeous, and you can use your physical body as a whip, and a gun that shoots bullets faster than a Sega Nomad munches batteries. Overall, this is a really good game with a sense of humor. Echo the Dolphin will kick you in the nuts. You begin the game as Echo swimming with your cool blue crew, and when you talk to this dolphin here, he tells you how high in the sky you can jump. So you do it, and, well, that was scary. This game is hard because you have to swim through the ocean avoiding and fighting enemies by jousting into enemies and awkwardly being Vic Viper. It's a good game, but a brutal one. Eternal Champions is a neat little fighting game, but I can't properly play it because this system doesn't come with a 6-button controller. I thought I could maybe try to play it as this mysterious fellow who looks like he's scowling at me when he found out I didn't like Yoshi's Island. I tried, but I got my butt kicked hard. This here is the sequel to Ghosts and Goblins called Ghouls and Ghosts, which basically came out before Super Ghouls and Ghosts for the Super Nintendo. It's very similar to those games where it's very hard and you have to play the game twice, because of course you do. But unlike when I beat Ghosts and Goblins, I actually felt really satisfied when I beat this game. Golden Axe is one of the 2 beat-em-up series that Sega made for the Genesis. The first one of these was Golden Axe. This game has a medieval setting, so I chose Gilius Thunderhead because I like his Viking design. It's your basic beat-em-up, fight the enemies on the screen and move on. However, the controls in beating up enemies feel pretty clunky. But you can summon some magic screen nuke if you have enough of these blue vase things. Also, you can run on these cool creature things, which is nice. Gunstar Heroes is a game I've heard a lot of praise towards, and recording it for this video made me really appreciate it more than I had before. It's basically like Contra in an anime style, and dare I say, better than hardcore. Kid Chameleon is an interesting little platformer. It feels basic at first, but then shows more originality as you play it more along, introducing these cool armor sets too. That's kinda all I have to say for this game, but it is a solid and I do recommend playing it. Landstalker, one of the greatest Zelda-like games on the Genesis, except here it's an isometric perspective, and I'm not a fan of this game's controls. I got used to it, but it isn't great. But yeah, it's basically an isometric Zelda-like game, and great one at that. Light Crusader is another Zelda-like game similar to Landstalker, but it actually has really good isometric controls akin to Super Mario RPG, before that game even came out. There's a story where you're a knight who needs to find out what happened to some missing civilians, but I didn't really fight any enemies. Also, you can push the NPCs, never mind, this game is a masterpiece. Mega Man The Wily Wars, the Super Mario All-Stars of Mega Man and the Sega Genesis. It's basically a remake of Mega Man's 1, 2, and 3 in 16-bit and with new Sega Genesis synthesizer remixes. I do like and prefer some music here, but in some cases you'd rather listen to the originals from the NES days. Also, this is the first time you could play this game after the Sega Channel was a thing in North America. I wouldn't really call this the Star Fox 2 of the Genesis Mini like some others have. Maybe like both of the bonus games on here, but this game and one more of these games weren't released in North America, so maybe it is? Monster World 4 was released only in Japan until it got re-released in North America and Europe via the Virtual Console. Okay, never mind, there's 3, not 2 of these games, but whatever. I think this is some kind of spin-off of or sequel in the Wonder Boy series or something. So basically it's a 2D platformer but has a tad bit of RPG elements, and that does sound like Zelda 2, but it's completely different from it, and by that I mean it's actually good. Phantasy Star 4 is the obvious 4th entry in Sega's RPG Phantasy Star series, and considered one of the best in the franchise, and is the last in the original series. After this, Phantasy Star would go online on the Dreamcast, but this game is considered really good from what I've heard, and wraps up the original series in a beautiful way. I've never ran into any battles while recording, but I hear they're similar to Phantasy Star 1's. I haven't played much of this game, but I do want to play to the end of this once I beat the first 3 games, since I always hear this is called one of the best RPGs on the Genesis. Road Rash 2 is awesome! Everyone talks about how awesome Super Mario Kart is, but This is way better than that, in my opinion. I mean, you're on a motorcycle and can punch the other racers off the track and get in trouble with the police. Also, upgrades and crap. Shining Force is the very first game in the surprisingly large Shining series. Seriously, the series has a surprisingly large amount of entries in the series, especially on the Saturn. It's a tactical RPG, and while I never encountered any enemies while recording, I do want to go back and play it to the end. Shinobi 3 is one of the best games in the Shinobi series. I hear all the time how amazing both this and Revenge of Shinobi are, and from what I played of this game, it is really good. Once again, you play as Joe Musashi from the first two games, beating up every other ninja you can see. God, this game is so good. But it is difficult.
So now we're gonna take a look at some game called Sonic the Hedgehog, whatever that is. You play as some blue hedgehog called Sonic who runs fast and can roll into a ball. What a strange little game. But what do you know, he got a sequel, and it's even better and faster. This is the game that shows blast processing. Sonic Spinball is a jank Sonic pinball game. That's all I have to say. Space Harrier 2, obviously a sequel to the Sega arcade classic Space Harrier, where you fly around the screen and shoot at enemies, so it's kind of like a space shooter, but from a behind the back perspective. Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition. The first ever revision of Street Fighter 2, and we all know it wouldn't be the last. I mean, it's Street Fighter 2, what else can I say? It's one of the most popular fighting games of all time. Streets of Rage 2, one of the best beat-em-ups on the Genesis, maybe even the best. You can play as a cast of 4 characters beating up criminals on the streets. Strider, this year's one of the best arcade ports for the Genesis. This and the arcade version are mostly perfectly similar. You basically plow down enemies with this long-range attack, trying to take down every enemy you see while moving as fast as possible, and it's very difficult. You will die, but wow is this satisfying and also kind of frustrating to play. It's hard, but great. Super Fantasy Zone was never released in North America and was exclusive to Europe and Japan. It's basically an almost as good version of Fantasy Zone, but if you don't know anything about it, you play as Opa Opa and shoot down these large capsule things in each stage to stop enemies from spawning. And you can upgrade your equipment at shops using the coins from the enemies and capsules. Tetris. This version is the other bonus game on this thing, and the reason it's special is because of its scarcity. This is the rarest Genesis game ever made, being made right at the beginning of its lifespan in 1988. It was never sold, and only 5 to 10 copies exist. Besides that, it's just a port of the Japanese arcade version of Tetris, which was also made by Sega. Thunder Force 3 is another space shooter, though you can choose whatever stage you want, and you can use a multitude of weapons at your disposal. It's also very hard. Toe Jam and Earl is a game where you play as either Toe Jam or Earl and try to find parts of your ship on Earth, coming across food, money, and presents that can contain all sorts of things. Vector Man is a really cool platformer with Donkey Kong Country-like graphics. The gameplay is kinda similar to Mega Man, well that's in terms of how you play with your character, by jump and shooting. Unlike Mega Man, however, you have a double jump and controls that are much faster and smoother. Virtua Fighter 2 is weird. The Genesis version is a 2D fighting game when the original arcade version was a 3D fighting game, and that carried over to the Saturn. And that released in 1994, and this released in 1997. If you're gonna play Virtua Fighter, play the arcade version and Saturn version, but I mean, if you just want to play a simple 2D fighter, I guess this isn't that bad. Wonder Boy and Monster World is just another Wonder Boy game. Moving on. World of Illusion is weird. I haven't beaten it, but it's a neat little platformer and sequel to Castle of Illusion, and with Donald Duck as well. But besides Mickey's new magic attack, there's not much worth talking about. And those were all 42 games in the Sega Genesis Mini. There's not much else to talk about besides that you can change the order like the other ones. Well, that was the Sega Genesis Mini. Overall, I'd probably say it's my personal favorite mini console ever. I do love the NES and SNES Classic Edition, but while the NES had quantity and the SNES had quality, this thing packs in both, and I think that's more beneficial. And it's just my personal Sega bias. But anyways, I'll see you guys later. See ya.